Hey everyone, this is Joe Turner with City Manager Unfiltered, and I wanted to let you know that this podcast episode contains adult themes and adult language, and that discretion should be advised, and also that it may not be suitable for your workplace environment. Last week, you listened to part one of the interview with Daniel Rosemond, the author of Death of the Public Servant. That podcast has performed really well. I've gotten really good feedback on it. Next week, I will drop part two, and that is Revenge of the Public Servant. That is where we're going to discuss in more detail his lawsuit and his ultimate victory in court against the city of Hallandale Beach. So don't forget, next week, part two of the interview series with Daniel Rosemond, and that is Revenge of the Public Servant. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is City Manager Unfiltered, a podcast by a city manager for city managers and other public sector executives. And I have a very special guest with us today. His name's Stephen Wade. He is the former Topeka, Kansas city manager. And he was in the news recently because he has been undergoing some mental health issues. And he had the courage and the bravery to come forward with some of those issues that he's been dealing with. He was struggling in that aspect, and unfortunately, it recently led to his termination. And so we're going to talk about his story and his journey and how he got here and why he's coming out and sharing his story with the public. And so welcome to the show, Stephen. I'm very grateful to have you on today.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Appreciate being here and having a chance.
Yeah, I think the first place to start, honestly, is why are you wanting to talk about this in public in the domain? Because we are in a time in 2023 where mental health issues are looked upon more favorably. People are more open to these conversations and discussing them. But I would put us in the category of, we still pay a lot of lip service to mental health, and we still pay a lot of like lip service to being open to it, but there's huge consequences and ramifications for you professionally by coming out and being vocal with your mental health issues. Can you elaborate on why you feel now you need to speak up in public?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It is a little scary to come out and talk about it. I really don't have anything personally to gain by talking about it. My hope is that it opens the door to somebody else because mental health is a scary thing. It's something we don't talk about a lot. And your audience being city managers, it's lonely at the top. We really don't have the resources for most folks to be able to deal with it. As you know, it's a high pressure job that is very demanding, and basically it's 24/7. And so with that release, it's really difficult. So my intention of talking about it is just for folks to understand that, Joe, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's not something that you have to hide. It's not something that you have to pretend doesn't exist. It truly is okay to not be okay.
But that's easier said than done, Stephen, right? Because in our profession, our positions, we are sort of tasked with always being on our A game and always having it together and being composed. And I mean, we're held to very strict standards, right? We're not allowed to really show emotion. We're not allowed to show anger. We sure as hell aren't really allowed to show that we're struggling mentally with health issues and so forth and so on. So I don't know how we bridge that gap, because I will tell you that in all my posts on LinkedIn, one of the most popular, or I shouldn't say popular, but one of the most talked about or engaged subject matter is things of like mental health, like, a burnout and so forth and so on. And we all know that we have this weight on our shoulders. I can't even imagine what it's like to be the city manager for the city of Topeka, state capital. I think you have something like 11 commissioners or governing body
Yeah,
members. I mean,
10. Yep.
10. I mean, you have a lot, a lot of people to answer to and explain yourself to. Did your job exacerbate your mental health issues, or was it just sort of coincidental? 'Cause I know you recently became the city manager of Topeka about 10 months ago or something like that. What role did your elevation to the city manager position play with your mental health?
No, it's a great question. Certainly, it made it worse. Now, I've struggled with mental health issues. Joe, I had somebody suggest to me when I was 16 years old that something was off. Had some challenges in college. Certainly, have had some challenges off and on throughout my professional career, and a lot of people have them. So, it's to me, it wasn't anything different than what other folks go through. I was a publisher in a newspaper company and spent about 18 years as a publisher. And for those on your call that don't know what that means, it's the newspaper equivalent of a city manager. And so I certainly have held positions of high pressure and have held positions of in public on demand, but certainly have never held a position where I had 10 bosses. And having 10 bosses, many of whom had different opinions.
Sure.
We were dealing with some topics of high pressure and homelessness being one that was very visible, to where there just was no commonality and agreement as to what the right approach was. That made things worse. And then, quite honestly, my meds got off. I got into a situation to where I could tell things weren't quite right, and made an adjustment in my medications. And unfortunately, that adjustment made things worse.
Now, Stephen, was that so for some? Can you break it down for a layman? So when you say your meds are off, is
Sure.
that just where you're going on your day-to-day routine and you just say, "Hey, I'm not feeling like my normal self," or is that when you say meds is off? Is that basically as simple as you having the self-awareness to say, "Hey, I'm not feeling right," or is it something more to it than that?
Unfortunately, it's hard for me to know when I'm off. It's usually easier for folks around me to know that something's not quite right.
Okay, all right.
And so, my closest friends are apt to understand it before I do. But I got to a point to where even I understood it. Was a little more agitated, was a lot more up and down, to where I understood that things weren't right with me, and went and got some help. And unfortunately, those adjustments just didn't go the right direction.
Now, when you say those adjustments, those are doctor prescribed adjustments. So the
That's
doctor,
correct.
you consult with your doctor or whatnot, and then do you is that like a forgive me, but mental health is such a uniquely individualistic
Hmm.
thing, I would
It
imagine.
is.
So I assume you have to interact with your doctor and try to describe what's going on, and you guys come to a meeting of the minds, so to speak, of what the adjustment should be, or how does that work? I mean, maybe it's a little bit too far into the weeds, but I'm just kind of fascinated by how you go to make an adjustment to your medication.
No, that's it. That's certainly, I don't know the meds, and so it's difficult for me to know which med does what, and how they interact with one another. So all I can do is try to describe what I'm feeling and what I'm going through, and then the doctor has to listen to that and then try to guess what the what the right approach is going to be.
Forgive this maybe callous analogy or not. You ever see the movie Days of Thunder with Tom Cruise?
Oh
Remember
yeah,
that movie?
oh yeah,
Like
yeah,
where basically Duvall is trying to tell Cruise like you're burning your tires or whatever,
yep.
and Tom Cruise says, "I don't know what you're talking about," right? It's and then so they have to break it down sort of into his lane. Is it sort of like that where like you just I'm feeling this way, I'm doing this, and the doctor's got to get you dialed in?
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. It's he's trying to interpret what it is you're saying. The one challenge to the mental health meds in most cases is it takes 2, 3, 4 to 6 weeks to dial in. It's not like device.
Overnight results, right?
Yeah, it's not like you're burning your tires and you need to take your foot off the gas. You may not know that for 3 or 4 weeks.
Wow. Yeah, that's and then also when you are coming down, there's a withdrawal period that you have to kind of clean it out of your system or something too, right? It's like
Yeah, so when you're doing that, you're downgrading, downsizing your dosages on one med while you're bringing up the dosage on the other. And that can happen in as quick as 1 week. It might take 2 to 3 weeks. It just depends on the med.
so
Um,
so you were talking about having mental health issues going back possibly to being 16 years old and whatnot, and here you are around 56 now.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm 46. So
yeah.
What that gap, that 40-year gap between 16 and 56, what sort of interactions and engagement have you had with mental health professionals or doctors between that period of time and now?
Yeah, so I made an attempt when I was in college and uh, excused.
An attempt on your life or an
I did.
attempt to reach out to a
No, I
doctor?
did. No, I made an attempt on my life in college,
Okay.
and excused it off as just being clumsy. So I didn't get immediate help at the time when I probably should have. Got married, had kids. I did seek some professional help at that point in time, and insurances didn't always used to be as friendly towards mental health as what it is now. Not that it's friendly now, but I think
Friendlier, I
it's
guess. I mean,
friendlier, right? And
yeah.
I think that at that point in time, I was allowed 6 or 7 visits and got through those 6 or 7 visits, and insurance said they're not going to pay for it anymore. And I wasn't smart enough at that point in time to say, well, I'm just going to go cash payment. I stopped seeing the psychiatrist,
Yeah.
and therefore he stopped prescribing my meds. And just as we were talking a second ago about transitioning, I basically stopped my meds cold turkey. And um, I'm going to tell you, that's not a fun situation to be in. And the mental state that it puts you in is very frightening. And because I went through that, I pretty much swore to myself I would not go seek help again. Uh,
Really?
and so I went several
So
years,
this, I assume you're in your 20s around this time then? Is this roughly, is that
early 30s.
early 30s? Okay. So you have this horrible experience where you quit cold turkey, health insurance issues, all that stuff, and you basically swear it off. What happens at that point between that visit and today? Did you have another interaction before you became employee with Topeka, or
Yeah, I had some friends get in my ear back in 2019. So this is pre-pandemic.
but that's still relatively recent. I mean, so that's a
Yep.
big gap in time between your 30s until just 2019. I mean, that's almost a 20-year gap.
It was, and I think the mother of my kids would tell you that wasn't a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So, you just try to get through it. You try to deal with it, and again, should have got help. I just didn't. But got to a point in 2019 to where I had some friends in my ear that basically said, you need help.
May I ask you, did you make an attempt on your life from that period of time in your 30 to your 50s, or were
I did
you
not.
able to
Nope, I did
make it
not.
through and
Yep.
cope through it?
Yep.
Why what I mean, obviously it's not ideal, I don't think, right? To go that period of time without having a mental health professional assisting you in any way. Why do you think you were able to go that 20-year period of time though without reaching that point?
Joe, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. There were lots of periods of time to where things were pretty low, and uh, some points in time to where I considered strongly um, getting some help, and just was able to, I guess, try to get through it on a day by day basis.
Do you think having children who were minors played any role in that at all, out of curiosity?
Yeah, no, I think it does. I think you
Okay.
always, as a parent, you're trying to look out for your kids, and certainly kids give you an additional motivation for trying to get through it.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
my kids are grown and gone now.
Yeah, the reason why I kind of bring that up is, and I don't want to make this about me, but just to share a little bit about my story is that I've had moments in time where I've thought about killing myself. I've
Yeah.
been through some pretty dark places and some pretty dark times, and there's a history of mental illness in my family. I'm sure probably every family pretty much has some sort of mental illness in it, to be honest. But my grandmother, she committed suicide right before I was born or right after I was born. I don't remember the story, and had some other relatives who had some mental health issues, and I went through a really really rough period of time. In my my mid to late 30s, and I'd been life was beating me up, right? Life
Yep.
was
Yep.
life had my number, and I had some thoughts about it, but I just never could get to that ultimate depth because of my son, and that was my sort of saving grace in that regard. So I was just kind of curious what kind of role that might have played. So fast forward to 2019, are you working with Topeka at that point? Because I know
I was
you
not. I
okay,
was not.
all right.
I was in the newspaper industry at that time.
Okay, so in 2019, you have some friends, loved ones in your ear, basically saying, "Hey, let's start checking in on this
Yep.
again." And
Yep.
then so that was your impetus to get help. And then how does that work from 2019 to basically 2022? How did that work out for you?
Yeah. So one thing that's pretty scary about the mental health industry right now, there's a 6 month lead time to get help.
What do you mean by that? I
Uh,
don't understand what that sounds crazy to me.
yeah. So right now, if you call the dentist, it might take you a few weeks to get in to see the dentist.
Right,
But if you are a new patient looking for mental health assistance, there's a 6 month lead time. It took, so I reached out in January of 2020. So again, this is pre pandemic.
right.
It took me until almost the 1st of July to where I could get in and see a counselor.
That's incredible. I mean, that's
And it's still that way. I mean, I verified that
is
this
this a
morning.
is this a regional thing or is this
No,
a national thing? I mean,
this is pretty widespread. That's not uncommon at all right now nationally. And the pandemic made it worse
sure,
because obviously the COVID messed with a lot of minds and a lot of hearts, and I think that did raise the awareness for some mental health, which means there's more people reaching out.
sure.
So on a volume basis, it made it worse. But I had a friend that would like to get in to see a counselor, and so I reached out to the individual that I see just to see if maybe he was taking new patients, and he told me yes, but the wait list right now is such that it's a minimum of 3 months, and for most folks it's 6 months.
I mean, that's really kind of unacceptable. I mean, when you think
Yep.
about it, we're talking mental health issues where people are
Yep.
literally, I mean, might be as serious. I mean, obviously, I know there's different variations of mental health, right, as far as
Yeah.
how it affects people. But if you got somebody who's literally on the brink of suicide, that's not a really good answer to give somebody. I mean,
It's not. Now the one good thing is if you're an individual that's contemplating that, there are some emergency services available. You can walk into any emergency room, and they may or may not be able to help you, but at least there's going to be a crisis, an immediate crisis averted. But if you're looking to try to get healthy and try to get your mind right and balanced, it's not good right now in the mental in the on the medical side. It's ridiculous. It's Joe. It's probably not that much different than if you or I were trying to make an appointment to go see a specialist, for back surgery or whatnot. It takes a long time, and I know it personally that it takes a long time to get in to see a neurosurgeon. But at least you're getting care in the process.
right, right.
In this particular case, you're not getting care. So you're waiting for that specialist, but you're kind of out there on your own.
So you see a doctor in July, right?
Mm-hmm.
And mind you, flashback to just a few minutes ago, which I kind of knew, but I kind of don't know. You're saying, hey, it still takes weeks upon
Yeah.
weeks before you even get dialed in with
Yeah.
your medication, right? So you go to a doctor in July of 2020, and walk us through how that progresses.
Yeah. At that point in time, if you're not seeing a psychiatrist, that means you're also having to hook up with.
That's
Sorry,
all right.
Joe. That's
That's
actually my. Actually, that's fun to talk about because that alarm is for my meds.
oh,
As we're sitting here talking about meds, part of the thing about the meds is if you're not consistent in when you're taking them and how you're taking them, that can mess you up also. So that alarm in the background was me saying, "Don't forget to take your meds."
Do we need to take a break, or do you need to do anything right now?
No, we'll get through it. But
Okay. All right.
um, I just again I apologize for that.
No, you're fine.
But
You're fine.
it's applicable that came up right now.
Yeah.
Um,
So okay. So you see the doctor, and you have your first visit and whatnot, and obviously you gotta get dialed in. So, how long does it take for you to finally kind of get to a place where you feel you're in a good frame of mind?
it took it was probably 6 weeks before
Okay.
I could really start to see the difference. And honestly, we've been making adjustments with medication levels and whatnot, for almost 3 years. Little tweaks here and there. You get to a point to where you max out on a dosage level,
Uh huh.
and so then they have to move you to a different medication. And in this particular case, I had moved to a different medication in the spring.
This is you're fast forwarding now to 2023 when things kind of went
23.
off the rails for you, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So you reached a max dosage of what you were taking, and you're like, okay, we gotta switch this up now and go to a different sort of formula.
that's
And
right.
that's when that formula didn't take.
That's right.
Okay. So the formula doesn't take, and how does it manifest itself? What sort of like when how quickly did you notice that it wasn't working, and then what were the beginning signs of your impairment of your behavior or actions, and just kind of walk us through that.
Yeah, that's the part where it gets tough and gets tricky because, as we're talking about the job of city manager, we were going through some pretty intense periods in Topeka. We were having a lot of controversy in regards to homelessness. We were trying to tackle a couple of economic development issues with a divided council. And so the job stress was high. And so really for me it was impossible to know, is this me? Is this my brain, or is this just the pressure cooker of the job? And it's really difficult to know at what point in time what is what. And so there were several weeks, months in there to where, looking back on it, I certainly was having some challenges with my brain that happened to coincide with some increase of stress on the job.
So earlier, you were talking about how, in many ways, those who are struggling with mental health, you were speaking primarily about yourself, but I think it's probably applicable to a larger population of those who have mental health issues, that you need to, or that you rely a little bit on those around you who know you to help
Hmm.
you kind of like, tap you on the shoulder, or say,
Yep.
hey, you're not yourself, right?
Yep.
Now, before you became the city manager in Topeka, you had already worked within the organization. Okay,
That's right.
so you'd had some history there, and you knew people. And I don't know exactly how open you were with your mental health issues as far as with your peers and your colleagues on site. Was there an element of that where people did know you a little bit have some familiarity with you, or and were they able to communicate to you, or because then you throw in another layer of the dynamic is you get elevated to the city manager position. Your peers and colleagues don't always necessarily feel like they can interact with you the same way that they did before, because you've had this change in the hierarchy. And so it's just a really convoluted and complicated time for you to be having this mental health issue. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's all fair. Certainly, I had a couple of colleagues that I trusted when I was in the finance department that were aware that I was getting help, and certainly would help keep me straight. Once you move into that city manager's job, you lose some of that day to day touch,
Right.
and so it's hard. It's harder for folks to, as you say, reach out and touch you on the shoulder and say, "Hey, dude."
Yeah. Yeah. So how did the mental health issues that you were struggling with manifest themselves essentially within the organization after you had this incorrect formula?
I can tell you that certainly I was less patient. I can tell you that, and by being less patient, maybe less willing to hear everything out. Certainly a little more irritable. Um, would drain quicker, and by that, just the energy level, items that normally not might not be that big of a deal took more energy out of you, and so I think that's a lot of it right there. Was just a matter of being emotionally drained, being physically drained.
And
And
are you aware of this in the moment that it's happening? Were you self-aware that this was dynamic was changing, or were you still
no,
kind of you
no,
weren't aware of it?
no.
So you're not aware of it, and then you also don't really have this fallback mechanism of individuals who are working with you on a day-to-day basis anymore, who are aware of your dynamics, and so you're sort of rudderless in this sort of battle that you're fighting mentally. Is that a fair sort of assessment?
Yeah, fortunately, I had one individual that was trying to help, that was a sounding board, but that wasn't enough. Most people don't understand mental health unless you have lived it and you're experienced with it. You don't know at that point in time really what's going on. And again, this coincided with a lot of difficult topics on undergoing at the same time. So, I think even for this person, it was hard to know,
Is
is
it
this the
mental
day to day
health, or is
job?
it
Yeah,
or the stresses of the job, right? I
that's
mean,
right.
because it can't be easy. It's never easy to be a city manager, but it can't be easy to be a city manager of a capital city with, like 10 bosses, like you said. And for those who don't know, the homeless issue is a major, major issue. I mean, you get beat up left and right on that, don't you, from
Oh,
different
yeah, for
stakeholder
sure.
groups and
Yeah,
what have
definitely.
you. Yeah. So this happens around that March, April timeframe. Is that correct in 2023?
Yeah, so I made some adjustments probably February, March. Fast forward into end of April, things were really starting to probably go off the rails a little bit. So that last part of April going in through the month of May, again, looking back on things, that's where things started to go off.
And how frequent were your interactions with your mental health professional or doctors when it came to once you made that formula change? How much interaction or touch points did you have with them to check in on that?
I typically was seeing somebody about every 2 weeks. I see somebody now on a weekly basis, but and to make matters worse, and not to get too far into the weeds, my provider at the time got called out for outside duty, and so there was a period of time. It was about 5 months in there to where I didn't even have access to my primary provider, and was seeing a substitute, which made things worse also.
Yeah, that's terrible. I mean, you got all these different forces lining up. It was just wow. What an amazing just sort of confluence of all these different events and factors that created this really untenable situation, and ultimately led to your professional demise,
Yeah.
which is sad and frustrating. I got to tell you, Stephen, working down here in Wichita, I pay attention to Kansas City. I followed the recruitment process for your position, and you were an internal applicant. And I remember when you were going through the process, I was like, oh man, I think Wade has the inside track. This is going to be pretty much his job to lose, because you had the hometown boy
Yeah.
connections. You worked
Yeah.
for the paper. You were in the organization, and by all accounts, this was I would say, by all accounts, to an outsider like me, it looked like, oh, this is the perfect dream scenario being lined up for Stephen Wade, and then 10 months later, or whatever it is, it's all coming down to a crashing end. And
Yeah.
it was just amazing to me. um you know I shared with you a little bit in a pre-interview, and this is something I want to talk about with mental health issues too, is when I saw the news that you had taken an indefinite leave of absence on a unanimous vote. My first thought was, oh, there has to be some sort of personal or family health situation.
Right.
I didn't know anything about you and your family. I didn't know if maybe, wife got sick or I didn't know anything, but I just figured, okay, he's a hometown boy. He was, supported by the council. By all accounts, things are going smoothly. It's a unanimous vote for this indefinite leave. There's some crazy stories about in the local media about whether or not they can put you on indefinite leave with pay, but it seemed like everything was going very supportive, and everything else. It just seemed like you'd be back at some point. We just didn't know when. And then you fast forward, and I've lost track of the time. It might have been 2 weeks or more, but all of a sudden you're terminated for cause on a unanimous vote, and now
Mhm.
you're lost. You've lost your source of income, and you've lost your health insurance benefits, and obviously those two factors. If you're looking on a board of, okay, someone who has mental health issues, and how do we get this person better and support them, losing their income and health insurance are probably the two that are not at the top of the list in the help column.
Right.
So how are you coping and getting through today?
Yeah, it's certainly not easy. Not having the severance is obviously would make it difficult on anybody. From a health insurance aspect, fortunately, I was able to pick up Cobra.
But Cobra's
The
not cheap.
Cobra's not cheap. The disappointing part about it for me, surprising, was so I did go on to the healthcare portal, health insurance portal that the government operates, and it's basically a clearinghouse to where you can look for other plans. And I could not find a plan that was less expensive than Cobra, nor could I find a plan that would continue the coverage that I already had. So, from a mental health aspect, there were parts of my regular healthcare that they weren't going to pick up. If I didn't take Cobra, I couldn't get the mental health care that I'm going through. And so really got backed into a situation to where I had to take Cobra just so I can keep my meds and keep my counseling and try to stay on a healthy path.
So Cobra doesn't last forever though, right? Isn't there a timeline on that? Or am I completely out to lunch on how Cobra operates? 'Cause I thought it was only for a short period of time that you're allowed to be on it.
Yeah, and without looking through paperwork, I think it's 18 months.
Okay.
I think there are certain components to where it could be up to 3 years, but I think primarily it's about 18 months.
Okay. And we talked in the pre-interview before about, well, one of the reasons why I was really I want to have this conversation with you is I have some blind spots, so to
Yep,
speak, that when it comes to mental health, and I wanted to be honest with the audience to talk about some of my biases and my perspectives on mental health, and I don't think I'm the only one who has some of my viewpoints, and I kind of wanted to engage in a little bit of a dialogue with you on it because you're older than me. You're 10 years older than me. I would probably put you in an old school kind of category, similar to
sure,
how I grew up and whatnot.
sure.
And so I would love to hear your perspective on some aspects of these conversations and feelings that I have. And and it's like, on one hand, Stephen, I want to be very supportive and empathetic of individuals who suffer from mental health issues. I mean, when an individual such as yourself makes an attempt on their life, right? Obviously, that's a serious issue, right? And I want to be respectful of that, and I want to be empathetic towards that. But on the other side of this continuum, it's almost like everyone and their mother has a support animal now, or
Yep,
has to take a mental
yep.
health day because things got a little tough and a little hard. And I'm not sure how to reconcile the balance on this continuum. Okay, so in my personal situation, and I'm going to get really vulnerable with you and the audience. For example, is I grew up in a really crappy childhood. My parents were drug addicts. They were incarcerated in prison. We were homeless at times. We were on welfare for significant periods of time. I lived in a very, very poor, violent neighborhoods. I, I bounced around from family friends to guardians to family members as far as while my parents were in and out of prison. And when I was in middle school, something I've shared with people, but I don't proactively share this with people. But I was sexually molested. Okay, and so I went through a very difficult childhood,
For sure.
and for me to get through that, I created mental constructs,
Yep.
and that's in order to survive. And so it's like I'll be very frank. I was going to be the toughest son of a bitch out there,
Yep.
and no one's going to break me down. Nobody was going to get to me. I wasn't going to rely on anybody. I adopted a quasi straight edge sort of perspective on things. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's, you don't do drugs, you don't do alcohol, abstain from sex. I wouldn't even take Tylenol for headaches. I was very sort of like, no, I don't need to be, I don't need to be, have my brain altered by anything or leave reality. I'm strong enough to handle it.
Sure.
And so I created this mentality of nothing's going to break me down, nothing's going to beat me. And it helps you get through a childhood that's traumatic into
Yep.
adulthood, but you carry these mental constructs that actually end up hurting you into adulthood because it hurts your ability to develop relationships, to be open and vulnerable with people, right? And I have this battle because on one hand, I want to say, hey, you know, um, forgive my language. I'll put an explicit marker on this one, but quit being a fucking pussy.
Yeah.
Get your ass in gear and do the job that needs to be done. So, what are your thoughts on somebody with my sort of old school perspective, where I'm trying to evolve, I'm trying to be more empathetic, and how do we find balance? Does that make sense? Because I don't know where to find that balance.
No, it makes perfect sense, and you're far from alone. In fact, you're in the vast majority. Like you and I had talked about early on, it's kind of that Midwest mindset that if you're not feeling great, put on your boots and pull them up, and let's get going. So when you asked me earlier, how did I get through those 20 years? Um, you know, I'm basically a workaholic. Um, I was very good at my job and found a lot of success professionally. And so that just made me dive deeper and deeper into my job. So I basically was avoiding my own health situation by pushing things professionally. I've had lots of people say to me, get some sleep, or tomorrow's going to be better, or suck it up. And that doesn't work. There are times to where we are all down. There are times to where we face difficult times, and so we're a little sad. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about chemical imbalances. We're talking about situations to where you can't snap your fingers.
Hmm.
Trust me, I wish I could. I would have snapped them a long time ago. I certainly would never have gotten to a point to where in early June I tried to kill myself.
Hmm.
And not only did I try it one day, I took steps to try to do it again the next day. And so that's not just because things weren't great. That's not just because there was pressure with the job. It's because there are things in your head that aren't right. Some of that can be handled through counseling. Certainly, some of the things that you were describing a second ago are things that you have to work through, and you can't. You're not likely to be able to do that on your own. It's going to take a professional to try to deal with that. But then there's the chemical side of things, and the chemical side of things, as we talked about, takes weeks to even start to have an effect. And then because it's not immediate, it takes months or it takes years to find whatever that right combination of stuff is. So, I think in the profession of city management, we've got to find as an industry a way to find more support. So if I think about ICMA and I think about the peer support efforts that are there, that are really aimed at, hey, I've got this situation, what do you think? how would you handle it? We really need to double down on the mental health side of things. And we really need to double down on it in a confidential way of doing it. Craig Owens is a great guy. He's the city manager for Lawrence. Been very supportive, and professionally, Craig has offered assistance. He's offered ideas. We've shared experiences. But I probably wasn't going to pick the phone up and call Craig and say, "Today's a day to where I'm thinking about ending my life."
Right.
That wasn't going to happen.
Right.
These, you know, city management is a small business. There's not a lot of there's not a lot of secrets, and so I think whether it's ICMA, whether it's somebody else, we've got to find a way to provide some assistance to our senior executives so that they can get the help that he or she needs.
Man, it's such a thorny issue because it's so difficult, Stephen, because it goes back to what I said a moment ago, and that is we are expected to be on our A game
We are.
24/7. And so the danger is that if you are a city manager and you're trying to get help, right? And you need to get help in some sort of confidential way, anonymous way, because if it
Yeah.
gets out, you're tainted, or your career could be ruined, or you could get fired. Because I mean,
Yeah.
here's the thing. I mean, like, I want to be, how do I say this? Nobody forces us to be city managers, right? We
That's
we
right.
we, we become city managers, and we have obligations and we have responsibilities. And where I struggle with this a little bit is a governing body has its job to represent the people and take care of the residents and the voters and all that stuff, and our job is to implement their vision and directives and all that. And if we open ourselves up to being vulnerable and saying, hey, I don't know if I can do the job right now to 100% of my abilities because I need some help, what is to keep us from getting fired or dismissed outright? Right. And that's what again is really difficult for us to seek out help in this profession. And I don't know how we bridge that gap. I mean, I know you talked about doing something anonymous and setting up programs, but to me, that's the crux of the issue, because for better or worse, the way it is right now, mentally speaking, I think it's fair, and I think you'll agree with me. If you have mental health issues, that has a negative connotation. You either have a weakness, a liability, or something. It's not the same as if you have a broken leg. If it's interesting. I literally had a pre-interview call with a city manager who went through a horrible, and I'm going to interview her at a later date. She recently had a horrendous health episode where she was on her motorcycle and suffered a stroke, and it
Mm.
led to her crashing and having becoming legally blind and all this stuff. And the great thing about her story is that her governing body stood by her and has worked through her recovery and so forth and so on. But I don't think that if she had a mental health issue, and I want to speak for that governing body per se, but I don't know if she would have had the same level of support or um assistance from her governing body. I don't know. Does that make sense what I'm
No,
saying?
it makes perfect sense, and I think obviously every governing body is different,
Right.
but I think that is the fear, and it's the fear that I had. I did not go to my governing body, to my bosses, and say I need help. I did not ask to take a leave for hospitalization until the very end, and that was after I had made an attempt on my life.
So
And
so if you sorry to interrupt you there, Stephen. So at what point did the governing body become aware, and how did they become aware of your struggles? Did you tell them at that point, or did they find out some other way?
no, I made an attempt on a Friday, and ended up meeting with the mayor and the deputy mayor the early part of that next week. And during those conversations, I asked to take a voluntary leave of absence.
And were they supportive of that?
They were,
Yeah. Okay.
they were, but
Okay.
I was very hesitant to reach out prior to that. I mean, I considered hospitalization two or three times. ultimately chose not to do it because, for one, in this community, the Topeka Fire Department are first responders,
Okay.
and so we have AMR in the market also. But you make a 911 call, you're either going to see the Topeka Police Department or you're going to see the Topeka Fire Department.
And you
Uh,
live in the city of Topeka, correct?
well, I live in the city of Topeka, and all those guys work for me.
Right.
So any thought of confidentiality
It's out the window.
is gone.
Yeah.
Um, Walking into the local emergency room or the local hospital and asking for help with a mental crisis, the your chances of confidentiality are gone.
Right.
There's HIPAA and all that other good stuff, but it's a small town. I mean,
Yeah.
Topeka is just a big small town,
Yeah.
and so for that reason, I wasn't willing to step out until it was too late. And even then, I tried to get help out of market so that I didn't have the exposure inside Topeka, and ultimately wasn't able to do that. So, my health treatment took place here in town.
So I want to go back to something, and I don't know if you feel comfortable answering this question or not. But a minute ago I asked you if the mayor and the council or whatnot were supportive of you in your when you informed them about your health issues. Did you get a sense that it was like, yeah, they're telling me that they support me and they're with me, but they're already sort of, you know, it's not they're already questioning, or did you feel like it was a 100% erstwhile support, and did you feel good after you had this interaction?
No, I think with those two individuals, I felt support, and
Awesome. That's great.
uh, nothing but support. And honestly, those two reached out, while I was checking on me during my hospitalization. They checked on me right after I got out of the hospital and was undergoing some intensive therapy. So certainly felt some support from those individuals.
You know, since you've come out and been public with your situation,
Hmm.
um, let me back up. I interviewed Daniel Rosemond this past 2 weeks. I had two different interviews, and he went through a very different situation, but he was terminated for cause. And so it's similar in a sense that he has gone through an immense financial and personal and emotional toll. One of the things we talked about in his interview, and he talks about in his book, was that after he was fired for cause, he was like a leper, and a lot of
Yep.
people abandoned him and didn't interact with him. They didn't return phone calls. They ignored his text messages, so forth and so on. What kind of support have you received from your friends and just people that you've been interacting? Because you've been in that community a long time, and I'm kind of
Yep.
curious, what kind of support have you received from your friends, families, peers, colleagues since this whole story came out?
Yeah. No, I think the people that I would have considered to be in my inner circle prior to this have largely stayed inside the inner circle.
Okay.
Folks that are a little more at arm's length are a lot more at arm's length now.
Okay.
But there's been some folks that I wouldn't have expected to reach out, that have been very kind, and especially once I told the story the first time, I've had any number of people that have said, "I'm sorry," and that took a lot of guts. But more importantly, hey, maybe now I'm going to try to get some help, and which
You mean
was the whole.
you mean you've had other people tell you
I
that because of
have,
you sharing your story, they're going to get some help?
I, I have.
That
Uh,
must make you feel pretty damn good.
it does. I mean, that was the motivation for doing it, was hoping that you can just help one person. But I, I didn't expect, I didn't expect that kind of response this fast.
Now, were these people that you knew that told you this, or people that you didn't know that just came and shared their story with
I've had
you, or
both.
both? Okay.
I've had both.
So let me ask you this, and I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit,
Sure.
because we talk about mental health, or you talk about a lot of being lonely and on your own, and just sort of your own inner battles and what have you. The individual or individuals that you knew that have then told you that your story inspired them to seek out help. Did you have any clue or idea that they might be going through mental health issues as well, or were just that completely oblivious to you?
Nah, completely oblivious to me.
See, I mean, that's the other thing that's really makes this a fascinating topic because so many people are fighting, maybe nearly everybody who has mental health issues, it seems to seemingly fighting this battle alone, or maybe not it's fair to say the overwhelming majority because you talk about your friends and support network and stuff like that, but it is such an intensely personal and individualistic struggle that, man, unless that individual actually goes out and verbalizes it, right, and like physically manifests in some way that they need help, it's hard to help these people. Is that fair to say?
Oh, it's almost impossible. Um, it's not like you have a broken arm. If you break your arm, Joe, you've probably got a cast on it.
Yep.
So it's pretty visible to everybody that
Yeah.
Joe's got a
Yeah.
broken arm. It doesn't work that way with mental health unless you have a real serious mental health issue that you're schizophrenic and you're just it's very visible obviously to everybody
Right.
that
Right.
but for most folks it's very silent, and certainly that's not just tied to mental health. You could be a lupus patient, you may be a cancer patient. There are lots of illnesses that are not visible to an everyday person, but the mental health side, there's just still enough of a stigma attached to it to where it's very hidden and it's very private. It's a tough one to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to let myself off the hook because I brought up my sort of biases or perspectives and whatnot, and I'm just want to, I guess, sort of revisit that and to kind of get back in that is, and maybe it's unfair for me to ask you for advice or feedback on this because you've got your own struggles and battles, and you're not necessarily an expert on this whole thing, but what should somebody like me, you talk about me, my mindset sort of being in the majority, are very commonly held, let's put it that way. What are things that individuals such as myself who have these mixed emotions as far as how to handle individuals who are claiming or say they have mental health issues versus, what I mean, what can we do to be more empathetic or give some more benefit of the doubt? Do you understand what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, Stephen, we are chief executives, right? We are
Yep.
CEOs of
Yep.
organizations and whatnot, and we have to run an organization. We have to ensure accountability is maintained. We have to ensure results and work product is completed. What are your thoughts on how individuals who might have some blinders on could be maybe a little bit more open to understanding the plight of those who are going through mental health struggles?
I think the first thing is it's okay to not understand, because unless you've been through it, Joe, the chances of you understanding what's going on are almost nil. And so you're not expected to solve a problem. You're not expected to give advice. You're not going to fix it. These are situations to where I'm a fixer.
Right.
You give me a problem and I'm on it, and I want to fix it. But if somebody's coming to me and they have a mental health issue, I can't fix that. And if I'm somebody that doesn't suffer from mental illness, you're not going to understand it either, let alone be able to fix it. So I think the advice I would give is just listen. And you do more just by listening and closing your mouth than anything. I know that you can't fix it. And so, Joe, if I'm talking to you, I don't expect you to fix it. In fact, quite honestly, I don't even want you to try.
Okay.
Um, what I want to be able to tell you is today was rough. Today was rough because of XYZ, or today's rough and I don't even know why today's rough. But I'm struggling today, and I appreciate you just being there. That, and I can't speak for anybody other than myself, but certainly as I've gone through some of this intensive therapy, That's one of the common denominators is how can you help? Just listen. That will do more than anything.
Do you think that we as leaders need to be more proactive in our engagement with subordinates and communicate that we are open and willing to listen to these things, or do we just keep our mouth shut and wait for someone to come to talk to us? Or you have any thoughts on that?
No, I do. I think we absolutely have a responsibility to be proactive.
Okay.
I,
So
I
what would you sat in the city manager's chair and you have this experience, right? And obviously there's different city managers and assistant city managers on the call, department heads, so forth and so on, all different sizes and levels of organization and government. What would you advise a city manager to do in light of your experience and history with your mental health issues? What is a takeaway that you would give a city manager listening to this podcast?
well, if I had to do it all over again, I certainly would have been more transparent with my bosses. If that's what you're asking.
Well, I mean, okay, so that's an interesting turn of. Well, I was speaking more in terms of you dealing with subordinates as a city manager, but you're talking about
Yeah,
with your governing body, which we can come back. Let's focus on that right now. So, do you feel like if you would have been more transparent with them, that you would have been in a much different position at the end of the day?
I definitely would have been without a doubt. Now, what I can't tell you is how they would have reacted. Right.
Well, when would you have been more? When do you think you should have been more transparent with them? Before you became the city manager, or after?
That's a good question.
'Cause that's a very dicey. And I mean, again, and Stephen, I only know you from afar,
Yeah,
and again, I see you as this hometown
yeah.
hometown boy, done good, right? And I think you might have a little bit of a more of a unique circumstance than a lot of other city managers. But I'm just kind of curious, when do you think that would have been? And because man, it's this is a tough question because everybody wants to be more transparent. I think
Yeah.
everyone wants to be inherently open with others, but we just feel like we can't run the risk. And I'm just kind of
No,
curious.
that's a good question. As far as the question about before, I had a city council member that I was pretty close with that was aware,
Okay.
and I think a couple of his colleagues had an idea,
Okay.
not to the extent, but at least knew that I dealt with depression. Looking back, given the question you just asked, I think one of the things that I could have done different, especially after I was offered the contract, I probably could have, as part of those conversations, been very clear that I have special needs, and those special needs mean that when I need help, I need to go get help.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe that's on me. Post contract, fast forward 4 months, 5 months, I think I wish I had been maybe a little more transparent as far as the challenges. But the flip side to that, Joe, is you don't even really I didn't really even know it. It's hard for me to.
That's right. It kind of snuck up on you this time around, right? I mean, it
Yeah,
wasn't.
it's
Yeah. I mean, because
I
sorry to interrupt you there, step on you there, Stephen, but I'm sure not that you felt that you had it totally under control, but I mean, from 2019 to this point in time, had you had many struggles with it? Because it sounded like everything was kind of. I mean, I'm sure there were some ups and downs here and there, but it sounded like everything was pretty much going pretty even keel. Is that a fair
no, yeah,
description?
no, I wouldn't say that.
Oh, okay,
There were lots of ups and downs over
okay.
the 3 years I've been in counseling. There's been lots of ups and downs.
Okay, so what the point I was going to make, which is maybe not relevant then, is do you when you're going through these cycles of your mental health journey, are there times where you feel like, oh, I got this under control? It's almost kind of goes back to the whole Alcoholics Anonymous and things like
Yep.
that. Like you're always an addict or you're always an alcoholic or whatnot. But are there times when you are going through these mental health journey that you're like, oh, I got this beat or I'm under control. This is good. Or are you always sort of like waiting for the hammer to drop or the shoe to drop or whatever expression you want to use?
I definitely felt like I had it under control. I definitely felt like that I was beating it, and that I was managing it. I definitely felt that way. And even when I was at some very low points, I felt like I controlled the outcome.
Were you lying to yourself?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And that's, after the hospitalization and going through some of this intensive therapy, that's been the light bulb for me. I was lying to myself. Joe, I suffer from mental illness, and I will always suffer from mental illness.
Did you believe that before you were hospitalized?
Uh, I knew I suffered from depression. Did I think that I would that I
Be-
that I did I think that I could control it? Yes, I did.
yeah, because almost a second ago, it almost sounds like you've, and I hate to use this word because it sounds like a negative connotation, but it's almost like you've submitted to, it's almost like you've submitted to understanding that this is a lifelong,
I have. No,
right?
I absolutely have.
But
I
you didn't have that submission before
absolutely not.
the suicide attempt, right?
Absolutely not. No, this I have now come to the understanding that this is a lifelong journey. I may forever be on medication. I may forever have to seek counseling.
Has that freed you a little bit mentally? Like, do you feel free at saying that? Like, is that also leading to the journey of why you're so public and out now sharing your story? Is that you've come to this realization? Is that play any role at all into this journey that you're on right now?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely does. It does free you up some. For one, I don't blame myself as much. And I'm not trying to be Pollyanna about it. I'm not trying to make excuses here, but I think understanding that it's not in my control. There are things I can do. There are things I have to do every day to try to manage my situation, but I don't get to control whether tomorrow I'm going to wake up and not want to be around. You know,
Is
I
is it a useful question for me to ask you what things that you need to do in order to sort of stay healthy? Like I know it's like such an individualistic journey. Are there things that you can share with anyone who might be listening who has mental health issues that you're doing on your journey that's helping you, or is that a useless line of questioning? I don't know.
no,
Forgive my I don't.
no, it's not useless at all. And some of it's the basics. Some of it is nutrition. Some of it is adequate sleep. Some of it is trying to get exercise. The challenge to it, and I was having this conversation earlier today. I know I need to exercise, right? And whether you suffer from mental illness or not, I think almost every doctor in America will say, go exercise. But sometimes I can't get myself out of bed.
Right.
And that's the part to where things are different. I know I need to eat better. I know I need to exercise more. I know that I need to sleep. There's days I can't. There's days it's different than a quote unquote normal person. Getting up and taking a shower and getting dressed and getting ready for work can be an arduous task. Nobody likes Monday mornings, right? It doesn't matter who you are. Most people
Right.
just don't like Monday mornings. But every day is Monday morning. And it's not just Monday, it's a bad Monday.
Right.
But I know that I need to try to eat better. I know that I need to try to exercise. I know that I need to try to get 8 hours of sleep. What I know now that I did not know before is that everybody has a limit to their energy. And as a city manager, your bosses don't care, right? The fire department doesn't care if there's a 2-story house on fire at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's the job, right? That's what we do.
Right.
But what I know now is that even more so because of what I have, there's a limit to my energy every day. And I didn't understand that before. What I didn't understand was that if I exceed my energy level today, I'm borrowing from tomorrow.
Really?
It's
What you really, is that how that works? I mean,
That's how it
that's
works. That's how it works. And if you're borrowing from tomorrow and you're not being careful with tomorrow, and so instead you're borrowing from the next day, and then the next day, and then the next day, you're getting yourself in some real trouble. There is, and I would encourage all of your listeners to go look at it. There is a story about spoons.
okay.
And if you don't mind me clicking on my
No, 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 no,
keyboard here
please.
for a second, let me see if I can find
No.
the author. When I saw that during my therapy,
It was like a
it
light bulb going off?
it was a light bulb because it's the first time I've ever seen it explained in a fashion to where I understood it, and more importantly, it's a story that I can share with others to try to explain what it is we're going through. The author is Christine. That's Christine with a C. Miserandino.
Okay.
Miserandino. And it's a blog called The Spoon Therapy.
Okay. I'll put it in the show notes for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
but basically it's a story. The author has lupus.
Okay.
Lupus is we were talking about that. Hey, I can't tell that you're sick concept, right?
Yep.
Has lupus and has a friend that she's having dinner with, and the friend says, "What's it like to have lupus?" And she's like, how do you describe that? How do I describe what's it like to have mental health issues? But she talks about it through the concept of spoons. And so, Joe, you get to start every day with 12 spoons.
Mm-hmm.
Getting out of bed might take one spoon. It might take three spoons. Taking a shower takes a spoon. Eating breakfast takes a spoon. Putting away the dishes takes a spoon. And if you only start with 12 spoons, you haven't even gotten to work yet, and you're already down six of them.
Right, right,
And so at the end of the day, you're having to make a decision. Do I eat? Do I put the dishes away? If you even got that far and still had spoons.
right.
And so it's a fascinating story. Certainly recommend everybody look at it. But that's what this is what it's like.
After you heard the spoon story,
Yeah.
looking back, especially going that 20-year period from
Yeah.
30 to 50, did that sort of crystallize things that you were
Yes.
feeling? Like, okay, all right, yeah.
I I wish I had seen this 20 years ago, because then I would have recognized I'm jeopardizing
I'm
not
low
only
on
my
spoons, right? I mean, I'm low on spoons
I'm low
today,
on
or whatever.
spoons. And
Yeah,
if I'd have shared that with my kids, if I would have shared that with my wife, if I would have shared that with my friends, I would have had more support because people would have understood what you're going through.
right, right,
Um, so that was a big takeaway from my therapy, was recognizing that when I'm out of gas, I'm out of spoons, I just need to stop. I need to step back, and I need to step away and recognize that I'm done for the day. There are times where I wish I'd have had that when I first started as a city manager, so I could have explained that to some of my council members, that it's 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday and they're pounding away on you because of some issue.
right,
I wish I could have at that point in time said, I can't talk. I'm out of spoons. I'm out of
right,
gas. I'm not in a point to where I can logically have a conversation with you. We need to wait.
right, right.
And I didn't do that.
So you come out with your story, you're public about it. It's a very personal, very vulnerable story. And I got to ask you, you had to be thinking, man, am I deep sixing committing professional suicide?
Absolutely.
Pardon the
Oh, yeah,
phrase,
yeah,
with respect to doing this, right? I mean,
yeah.
when you do you have desires or aspirations to still be in the city management business, or do you feel like that book's closed on that season of life? I mean, where are you at mentally with that whole
Oh, I think I've deep sixed my career as a city manager.
by coming out and saying by coming out and being this vulnerable?
I think by combination of being vulnerable and by not recognizing that I needed help faster. You know, I'd have been a better city manager if I would have taken better care of my health during that tenure.
I hear you.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make
And
sense.
I'm not
Yeah,
saying I wasn't a good one,
yeah.
because we were doing some really really
Well,
good
you
things.
well, we didn't even get into that, Stephen, because it's kind of not really the I guess really super germane to the story. But I mean, you've been hitting it hard and heavy the last
Yeah,
10 months or so. I mean, you were making a lot of transformative changes within the
yeah,
organization. I mean, there was stuff going on internally, and I don't mean stuff as in a negative
yeah,
sense. I mean, you were
yeah,
internally
yeah.
adding positions and growing the organization, and yeah. So so do you have a desire to be a city manager anymore, or is that desire no longer there?
I think at this point in time, it's not there. Um,
Okay.
Now, could that change later? Possibly, but I think the focus for me right now is getting my mental health under control.
So how do you get your mental health under control in an environment where you've been stripped of your income and you're struggling with super expensive healthcare? And what can anybody who's listening, if anything, do to assist you? Because shortly after you were terminated, you posted on LinkedIn that you were, looking for opportunities because obviously you need to earn a
Yeah,
living, right?
yeah,
Well, what can any of us do to possibly help you in that regard? I don't know what you're trying to endeavor to do. I don't know if you're looking to do some consulting or whatnot. I mean, what support can be provided to you by the listeners?
yeah. Lots. I think for me, I just need to stay out of the number one chair. Uh, I'm a solid number two. I'm a solid number three. That CFO type of role, which is what I was in before I took the city manager's role. I'm good at. I'm good at the COO level. That deputy type position.
Okay. So you're not interested in foregoing service in the public sector. Period. You think you still have a desire and a passion to be engaged, but you just need to find a role that's a better fit for what you're going through.
Yes. No, that's fair.
Okay.
I got into this because I wanted to make a difference.
Right.
And that's the beauty of public service. You truly have an opportunity to make a difference. And especially as a city manager, there were some
For
things we
sure.
were doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's
Um,
that's that's the thing I love about this job is that you
but
can you can put your thumb on the
yep,
scale and you can make
yep,
a difference.
yep. But I think right now during my recovery, I need to stay out of that number one role and I need to look at that number two, number three type of role and give myself a chance to get healthy.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm glad we cleared that up because I
Yeah.
wasn't sure if you were saying that you're trying to basically get out of the public sector completely, but I think a lot of people listening might have been had the first impression was that you're just done with the public sector, but no, you definitely
No,
want to stay in and okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
awesome. So hopefully someone listening or whatnot will have an opportunity or will give you a look and what have you. I do know that in the article that came out, the big piece, the big treatment of your situation, you mentioned, I believe, some other sources of inspiration or help or assistance, and I wasn't sure if you wanted to elaborate on that of what you found useful and beneficial to you, and might be useful and beneficial to others that are listening.
Yeah, so that's the spoon therapy that
Right.
we talked about. It was a big one. There's an individual here locally, Damon Parker, that was a high school wrestling coach that suffered with heavy depression, and Damon's been extremely vulnerable and has gotten out and is kind of making this circuit right now, talking to groups and working through that. And Damon spoke at one of the gatherings that we had for Kansas City managers a couple years ago, year and a half ago. I listened to him in Atchison, and it was inspirational for me to listen to him because I was suffering with I suffered with depression, and so I could identify with what he was going through. So Damon was an inspiration. I think right now it's just trying to get through it.
Yeah. Well, I really am appreciating the fact that you're willing to share your story and be vulnerable because I there's no easy way to do this. I mean, there's you're damned if you do, damned if you don't in many ways. And I'm hoping that as a result of you coming out and being public with your story and being vulnerable, that those individuals who have an opportunity to lend help in some form or fashion can do that. And I'm also hoping that other individuals who are listening to this podcast who know somebody who has mental health issues can be a little bit more in tune and engage with those individuals to offer up the support that they need. And then third, I'm hoping that more individuals such as myself who have their own struggles with balancing empathy with their own sort of worldview and perspectives on things might be able to soften their approach a little bit and be a little bit more aware of the dynamics that individuals are facing. I struggle with this because I want to be empathetic and I want to be a supportive person. I want to be a good person. I want to help
Yeah,
people. I mean,
sure.
I wouldn't be in the city management
That's
business
right.
if I didn't want to help people.
That's right.
And so I think we're in this interesting time where there's a huge focus on putting more attention on mental health, and I still might be behind the times if I'm being honest, or I'm just being self aware of where my blind spots are. So your story is remarkable because I honestly don't know if I can recall. I don't know if I can honestly recall ever a story about a city manager voluntarily admitting that they attempted to kill themselves or that they were. I mean, I'm sure there's been some who've talked about mental health and things of that sort of nature, but I'm not sure about the level of vulnerability that you've expressed. It was just it was a very difficult story to read because, like I said, I was so bummed out in your situation because it seemed like everything had lined up and been the perfect situation for you, and then for it to just sort of kind of fall apart, I felt really bad and really terrible for your situation, and I'm grateful that you were willing to take the time to speak with me today.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out, Joe. When you shared the story that the paper ran, I was amazed at the number of people and the responses that came off your posting. Folks that either I barely know, folks I had no in touch with at all, but just seeing some of the postings and responses that you got, and then some of those same folks reaching out to me, that was inspirational for me, to be honest.
Awesome.
But then you given me the opportunity to do this, because you know what my first reaction was when you called was, I'm not sure I want to do that,
Yeah, I don't blame you.
but you've been great with it, and I appreciate you even wanting to tell the story.
Absolutely. Is there anything that we haven't covered or any resources or anything like that that you feel like maybe we forgot to mention or anything of that sort of nature before we wrap up?
I don't think so. Just as an individual, listen, just
Yeah.
try to listen.
Well, thank you, and I hope you have a lot of better days ahead.
Thanks,
You
Joe. I
know,
appreciate it.
and obviously, I don't know what else I can do to help, but if there's anything I can do to help, or if you ever want to come back on and have a platform to speak about what you're working on, or a project that you're working on, I want to help you and assist you in any way. And just thank you so much for
No,
being open. So.
thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right.
This is Joe Turner. I'm the host of City Manager Unfiltered, a podcast by City Manager for city managers and other public sector executives. Thank you for listening today to this very special episode, and I'll catch you next week.